Wellness on Purpose podcast. It's your host, Marissa Laughlin here, and I am joined by my lovely Joanne's Place co-workers again, Sarah, Rebecca, and Heather, where we are bringing you the sustainability series. For the last episode of this series, we want to bring some awareness to the reduce, reuse, recycle, and composting initiatives that are in place in our community and how we can help to support you to implement those initiatives in your home, your office, and your everyday life. Let's start by getting to the basics of reduce, reuse, recycling, compost, because these are foundational things that you were taught in grade school. I remember being in grade 6, 7, and 8 and being a part of a recycling committee. And to be honest, back then, it was the cool thing to be a part of. It was one of those clubs where you spent part of your recess or part of your morning where you got to go class to class, grab the recycling bins, and then actually physically sort the recycling to make sure that it was in its right place. I really don't know if schools still have that in place, especially right now, but I remember that this was something that brought me so much excitement and so much joy. And even now, I am definitely somebody who always recycles at home, but I would say as an adult, my main focus is usually the reduce and the reuse aspect. And that's what we kind of want to start on for today's topic, is that when we look at that principle of reduce, reuse, and recycle, recycling is the last piece, right? Like reduce and reuse are step 1 and step 2. And I feel like the reduce step was overlooked so much because it didn't matter what we bought. There was always the option that we could recycle whatever that item or food product came in. But I would say over the last few years, it's been a real global initiative to get to the point of reducing, saying no to things that you don't need, and for the things that you do need, you are conscious as to, the packaging that it comes in, the amount of plastic that is needed to be recycled after, or the amount of pieces that may actually not be recyclable and has to be thrown out. And it's so enlightening to see that this is starting to become a movement, but I really don't think globally we are there yet because we are always resulting to the recycling aspect still. And I know within Joanne's Place, we can speak to some things that actually help to reduce waste. And one of the biggest things is that we have our plastic bags. Forever, we were really one of the first places probably in Peterborough that had compostable and biodegradable plastic bags. And that's an amazing initiative that I think a lot of stores are finally on board with. They're either saying no, or they're giving you options like paper bags and things like that. But also, you're starting to see ways in which you can reduce the plastic that you are buying into. So when you're buying fruits and vegetables, you're buying them loosely and putting them into your own mesh bags rather than into a plastic bag. That's been a pretty big movement, I would say, in the last few years. Same thing for bulk. I think a lot of bulk things, I even know at Joanne's Place, like we have an abundance of things in bulk now with the actual bulk bins where we allow people to come in with their own containers and their own bags to weigh that out so that there is no waste after. And what's really great about reducing that waste and reducing the amount of excess we have to enjoy those nutrient-dense foods is that we are also incorporating reuse, because we are reusing glass jars, we're reusing mesh bags and linen bags to refill these items that we may need in a bulk perspective. Now, that isn't always accessible, obviously, but it's been incredibly empowering to see a lot of companies really get on board with refill stations and reducing the amount of packaging that you have as a waste option. Now, Sarah, I know your family and you yourself are really passionate about reducing food waste. So do you want to talk a little bit towards that as a mother perspective?
Reducing is so important, especially because we do live in a culture where materialism, consumerism is just rampant, right? The need for stuff because someone else has it, because I saw it on social, because my neighbor has it, and therefore I want it. And I think the pandemic has been so challenging and hard, but that we've been forced to ask what we truly need versus what we want and what matters, right? And we're seeing a shift towards, I think, a more positive outcome for this, which may be excellent for these types of initiatives, is people got used to going without. They couldn't have everything they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And they learned to live with another alternative or with not having it at all. You know, when it comes to food specifically, I am a little bit crazy about food waste in my household. Like, I probably take it to like too big of a like an issue. But like for me, we have like a 2-week cycle where, so basically my fridge will be full at the beginning of 2 weeks and almost completely empty by the end of 2 weeks, because I will use every single thing possible in my fridge before I purchase something else.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, because I don't mind cooking, because I like being creative, that's something I've been able to do, and my kids laugh, and even my husband, like, they'll know it's like the day before I go shopping, because literally, like, I almost took a picture the other day and posted it on Facebook, said, does anybody else's fridge ever look like this? Because it was really empty. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that brings me a sense of satisfaction, because I know that I'm not wasting things. And that's really important to me. Just with all the things we've talked about, just people, planet, profit, is just not wasting things.
Yeah.
Not buying something I don't need, not buying something I won't use, even if it's like calling my name from the shelf. Will I really use this? Yes or no? So that has been actually a really fun journey to go through, and even like purging. I know everybody through the pandemic did this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was like the thing to do, is purge, right? Purge clothing, purge furniture, purge stuff, right? And there's lots of cultures where minimalism is linked to happiness,
Yeah.
right? Just having less.
Well, it's
more
like
fulfilling.
Murray, like all like
Where you found
pre-COVID
it.
was like, you know, does it spark joy and
Yeah,
bring happiness, right? So that's kind of cool that we're all like moving towards that way of thinking. It's crazy to think, like, was this a 90s like push? Like, did like the whole reduce, reuse, recycle come out in the 90s?
Probably, yes.
Yeah, because I remember like thinking back to like when that first came out, and just even just the transition from, you know, where that was then and to where we are now. And it's even thinking about, you know, reducing, which is nice for your bank account, but like reducing what you're spending. So like, is just because it's on sale doesn't mean you need to buy it,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Like, just because it's, you know, marked down doesn't mean that it needs to go in your closet or in your cupboard. And
Yes.
sometimes I think we forget that we are being marketed to, right? So
Yes.
we are consumers to the market. So they're trying to entice us to buy things and give it in ways that we may not necessarily need, but we're being subliminally manipulated in that sense. So being aware that that's happening and being conscious, you're gonna just automatically stop, you know, spending those extra dollars on things that you really don't need. And then again, so just keep reducing that impact.
And when you reduce those temptations and that the marketing, I mean, yes, there's definitely times when you do need something, like you need to replace something. But this kind of comes full circle back to our first episode. When you reduce the amount of extra things you're buying, you have those dollars to spend on really what actually is going to make a difference in your health and your wellness, and that's going to be the certified organic vegetables and meats and more local products and things like that. That's going to have an impact. So like we said at the beginning, it's adjusting that budget and the balance of where you're putting your money and what really matters to you at the end of the day. So aside from reduce, you know, we can say as much as we want to cut back on all of our spending in all those other areas, but the next option, if you cannot reduce buying things, the next thing would be reuse. So what types of tips can we give to our listeners to reuse in what they have, or in terms of buying something that they'll be able to reuse again?
I think and my husband laughs at me because the amount of glass jars that I've saved from everything is ridiculous. So just a heads up, if you're going to start saving your glass jars, make sure that they're really good ones and that you want to keep them, because if not, your collection will get pretty big pretty quickly. But just even things like that. So like using glass jars instead of Tupperware containers, and restoring things in that sense, or reusing scraps like in your kitchen, right? So one of the things that I do at home and we do at 76 Sips is taking all our scraps and making it into soup stock. So just quickly taking all of those leftover bits, throwing them in the freezer until I have enough to put together a full thing on the stove, and making soup stock out of it. So something that would have literally been garbage, I'm now taking and making it into something else. So it's just being resourceful and utilizing what you already have in different ways, right? So even things like cooking oils. Are you a type of family that has like umpteen different kinds of cooking oils? Is that something that you could use one and just keep reusing the same one over and over again, so you're not buying as many different varieties? There's when it comes to reusing, like there's so many different things that you can do, right? So like even your clothes, like this, I think clothes when it comes to like sustainability is huge, but thinking about how quick we are to throw things away when they've got a hole in them, where we go back to like, the 1940s and the 50s, when if you had a hole in something, you'd darn it and you'd stitch it back up and you'd fix it. Whereas nowadays we're so used to things being so quick and easy, and I think that the accessibility is something that we have kind of become accustomed to, that we forget that we can sew things and that sewing needles exist and we can just fix a pair of pants or something like that. And just because it has a rip in it doesn't mean it's broken and it's damaged. And if for some reason you don't want to use those pants for that, then change it into something else. What can you make and utilize from that? And how many shirts do I have that have turned into rags and cloths just to use around the house and different things? So yeah, it's just being creative and figuring out what that means to you.
I think another great way to reuse too is utilizing freezer space. Like I know that not everyone's house may be able to hold like an extra freezer, but there's so many things that can be frozen before they go to date, or even like cheese, for example, that has one little piece of mold on it, cutting it up, grating it, putting it in the freezer. Like I think there's a lot of things can be frozen that people aren't aware of that still, once you pull it out, can be used kind of just like it was before. Freezing excess berries before they go bad, or bananas before they get too ripe and pulling them out to go into smoothies. Like utilizing that type of space, if you have an option for another freezer, is amazing. Like bread before it goes dated can be frozen and is pulled out and toasted. So I think that there's a lot of ways to ensure that, reusing, you don't really reuse food, but saving it before it goes bad.
And I think a lot of it too, again, it falls into the category of you can't be perfect when it comes to this stuff, but you can try your best. So it's how far do you want to go and how much time do you really have to invest into it. So even like thinking about bananas, so okay, you've got the option, you've had fresh bananas, now you're going to freeze them, make banana bread or whatever the case may be. The thing is you can then take those peels, soak them in some water, let them sit over on the counter for a year, I was going to say, for a week, and you've got some fertilizer for your houseplants. So it's just being creative and thinking outside of the box and realizing that you have the ability to use things that you already have to give you the benefit of the things you need. So if your plants are needing fertilizer or needing a little bit of extra nutrients, instead of looking and running to the store to get something that's in a container, chemically made, or it could be potentially organic, but something else that's processed, you have the ability to use something that you would have already thrown out and just thinking of a different way to outsource it.
Awesome points, ladies. I think everyone listening, including myself, can really use those recommendations as quick and easy steps to really reusing the items that we have. I really like that you said about the banana peels. I've seen so many videos about making plant food from banana peels. I just haven't done it yet. So that will definitely be on my to-do list. The next pillar I want to talk about is recycle. Okay, let's start with pointing out the obvious. Most homes, most businesses, most offices, most restaurants all have some type of recycling bins in their location. But a lot of people actually have no idea what happens once that recycling is actually picked up, whether it's at the end of their driveway or their recycling bins in their parking lots, or there's a company that comes to pick those things up. Nobody knows what happens after you put that piece of recycling actually in a recycling box, unless you're familiar with the recycling process. And something that you might not know is that the recycling company's priority is not actually environmental. I want to reiterate that. Their number one priority as a recycling company, the first pillar for that is not sustainability practices and making sure that everything is in the right spot for recycling. That's up to us. If we want to see things be recycled properly, we have to follow the rules to allow that to happen. As soon as there is a disruption in the recycling process, the recycling companies don't have the time, the money, or the resources to fix every single person's mistake. So what I mean by mistake is that if you throw your containers in the recycling that have not been washed out, such as pasta sauce jars with a little bit of pasta still in them, if you don't clean out your peanut butter containers, if you put pizza boxes in there that's all stained with oil or still has food residue left over, the recycling companies aren't going to single-handedly pick those items out and dispose of them. What they're going to do is dispose of everything that's around that, because that's easier and more cost effective for them to do that. So if you are somebody who doesn't rinse every single thing out and you throw it and you're recycling it in a bag in hopes that, somebody else will correct your mistake, that's not the case. And unfortunately, that happens way more often than you might think happens. Is recycling companies, their first number one thing is not to prioritize everyone else's recycling. That's our job as individuals, as consumers, as people who want to see a change be made, is we have to make sure that we're following those rules so that the actual recycling plants can do their job properly, and that we're not the reason that that recycling process is disrupted.
And another point just to add to recycling too, unless there's a buyer for recycled goods, those products won't be recycled. Mm-hmm. So for us to be mindful to buy things made from recycled plastic, to buy, like if you're going to make that choice, if you don't have another option, to ensure that you're trying to buy things wherever possible that are made from recycled glass, made from recycled plastic, because if there is no buyer for those products, then those products will not be recycled.
No. And plastic is obviously probably the top type of raw material that gets recycled for most people. And if you think about how many people are recycling plastic, there's only so much that can be bought. Mm-hmm. So that's why a lot of recycling, unfortunately, does end up in the garbage.
We have seen, I know, we carry a type of water, for example, Joanne's place called Earth Water, that they came out with water in aluminum. So at first that was kind of like interesting, right? We're trying to avoid some of these things, but aluminum is actually the fastest recycled material on the market, 45 days. And it is a guaranteed recycle. It's one of the ones that they do recycle regularly. So this particular company saw an opportunity then to take that and put water in it instead of plastic, because there's a guarantee that this aluminum to be recycled versus plastic, it takes a much longer period of time. So it's interesting to see some of the innovations coming from stuff like that.
And realizing that not all plastic is created equal. If you look on your plastic, say, container, there's usually a different number on it, and different numbers are recycled more frequently than others. Also keeping in mind that, recycle is the last on the list for this. So if you have to, you've refused your plastic container when you've gone out to get food, you've reduced what you're consuming, you've reused some things at home, and then you're recycling, and then, like Marissa said, so it's actually more infrequent that things are bought and recycled into new products.
Yeah, so when it comes to recycling plastics, like Rebecca said earlier about the numbers on your containers, so those are actually extremely important, and some of the numbers actually aren't even recyclable at all. So if you actually look, the numbers 1 and 2, if anything recycled is number 1 or 2, those are your containers that are like water bottles and things like that. That's like a very thin type of plastic. Those are easy to be recycled. Things that are 3s, 6s, and 7s, these are more of your cooking containers, so like your takeaway containers, anything that's food packaging and things like that, which actually is not recyclable. And then when you get into your other numbers, you're looking at things like toys and really hard plastics, and even things like certain milk jugs, they're not recyclable either. So the actual amount of recyclable plastic is very, very minimal. And the thing is we actually, as people and just in general, we see things and we're like, this is plastic, we're just going to throw this into our recycling bin, and hopefully it gets, it goes to the right spot. So it's hard, because us as consumers and individuals that care about the environment can only do so much, because at the end of the day, the recycling practices don't necessarily fall on us. It falls on our government and our local municipalities, because however they want to process things and how they want to distribute it, as well as the people that are creating the products, right? So coming into 2021, we're lucky that we're starting to create a little bit more of an uproar that plastics and things like that aren't that great and acceptable to use. So we're looking for alternatives and wanting to pull on that.
And one thing to take note as to what you just said in terms of consumers wanting other packaging options, one thing to just really state and keep in mind is there also comes a cost for that. And that's a reason why most products are coming in plastic rather than aluminum or biodegradable or compostable things, is there's a price point behind it. So if a company is willing to invest in different packaging, that stands to probably their values and their vision and what their product is. But that's why you see a lot of things in plastic, because it's cheap. It's packaged cheaply, it's made cheaply, it can be recycled and reused. Essentially, we just said not as quickly, but still recycled. And so that's one other thing to keep in mind is we want these products, we want things to be biodegradable or compostable, but that will also still come at a cost.
I think it's also really important to look in your municipality and look at what can be recycled and what goes in which box. I know Peterborough has this really neat thing on their website, and you can just type the name of an item and they'll tell you exactly the best way to dispose of it, whether it can go in your recycling bin, whether you have to put it in the garbage. And then they have like a little waste sorting game as well. So just educating yourself on, what are the guidelines within your municipality so that you're not experiencing things like your whole recycling bin being thrown into the garbage because you've accidentally put something in the wrong spot.
Well, one of the things that Rebecca actually became a bit of an expert on was our lids for 76 Sips. We took them to the Peterborough Waste Center just to even see what we could recycle or not. And do you want to touch base on that? Because not all of our, the products or the samples we were looking at, some of them couldn't even be.
Yeah, so when we first opened 76 Sips, we were really trying to determine which containers that we should use. And what actually one of the packaging companies recommended to me was taking them to the local municipality, and then the local municipality will let you know which ones can be recycled. So that's exactly what I did. I had a few samples from a few different companies, and I took them over there, and they said, our machine didn't even recognize these things, so they would be thrown in the garbage, but these containers here will be fully recycled. So that's what we did when it came down to our smoothie cups. So our current smoothie cups that we use, I can confirm for sure can be recycled in the Peterborough community.
When they're clean.
When they're clean.
Okay, so we're going to talk more about 76 Sips and the initiatives that they have taken in terms of their packaging in just a minute here. But before we talk about that, let's talk about composting. Fortunately, in Peterborough, we do have some limitations. I know that there's a couple communities. So Millbrook, North Cabin, some autonomy townships are offering composting based on their municipality, but not every municipality has this. They're doing it as a pilot project. And Peterborough also is not necessarily on this path yet. Now, we've mentioned so many times through all of our podcasts in this series is we as consumers have the power. We really do. We have the power to push things in our community, whether we're writing letters to our municipalities or we're writing letters to the mayor. It doesn't matter who it is. That all has to, be at the forefront for change to happen. So composting. This is something that's been around forever, for years. Or you may have your own composter in your backyard, but there's other initiatives in Peterborough and that companies are doing for composting. But before we talk about those, let's talk about what composting is.
Okay, so when it comes to composting, the whole idea is that anything that's basically made out of organic matter can be taken and then converted into nutrient-dense soil. So what happens with composting is there actually needs to be a certain biofield that needs to take place in order for everything to break down. But what happens is during that process, all the nitrogen is created. You end up getting really dense nutrient soil. It can take some time in order to make that happen, but it is very possible and it's very easy to do. And the only thing you need to do is throw out your scraps. So it's just an idea of being more sustainable and taking what we have to create something else. So if we're looking at practices, especially when it comes to soil, on a grand scale of things, as a municipality, we would have the opportunity to create a very wide nutrients dense amount of fertilizer for our local community. On a smaller scale, if you're doing it on your home, you have the chance of creating soil just for yourself or in your gardens or your household plants and things like that. It's just it's the best form of taking something and giving it back, right? So if you look at any of your fruits and vegetables, anything that's grown, how do we get that back into the soil instead of it being thrown into a plastic bag just to disintegrate? Because then what ends up happening there is you're creating gases inside that bag that gets thrown in the garbage, and then it ends up creating an even bigger mess than what you can avoid with composting. So it's one of the things that we at Joanne's Place are always striving for. We have tried multiple different ways of trying to compost and making it happen. Unfortunately, right now, with the municipality being set up the way it is, we're limited. So this is one of the reasons why we wanted to bring this onto the podcast and start this conversation, because I know if we're struggling, the rest of you must be struggling as well. So let's get the conversation going about why it's important and what we should do in order to make that happen in Peterborough.
And what's great about that is you can have your own composter at your house. Now, there's different limitations in terms of if you live in the city, maybe you don't have a backyard, but if you do live, in the rural areas, you might be able to have your own composter accessible. And what's great is what Heather mentioned is, instead of it landing these scraps in your garbage and then going into the landfill, and essentially what that's doing is still breaking down in a landfill, but there's other things that are also breaking down in landfills, like plastics and things like that are going to leach into the soil. So that soil isn't used really anywhere else. Whereas we can actually use those nutrients that are still readily available in that produce and re-nourish our soil. We could all have beautiful gardens, whether it's vegetable gardens, or this could be just soil being used in our homes or in our yards as well too. Now, in terms of composting, there are some things that are also able to go into composting that people would look at, and they'd be more biodegradable products. So can you guys talk about what biodegradable really means?
So biodegradable is a great alternative to plastics, right? So biodegradable means that it's going to disintegrate and break down without any use of other materials. So when we're saying here with composting, there's a specific mechanism or a specific ingredient or recipe, you could say, that is required in order to take that food waste and those scraps and then to make that into soil. Whereas when it comes to biodegradable, what happens is it just naturally disintegrates and breaks down in the environment if it was just to be left alone. There's things from straws to plastic bags, takeout containers. There's lots of different things that can be done with biodegradable, but that's the main thing is you can technically throw biodegradable in composts, but it doesn't necessarily need to be thrown in there for it to break down.
So aside from the natural things like, bananas and takeout containers and things like that, let's talk about some products that we have at Joanne's Place that we are looking at in terms of their packaging and how they're produced in order to be more biodegradable or more sustainable in terms of recycling and reusing within our municipality as well too.
So there is definitely, we've referenced already foods that are biodegradable, like things that come in their natural state, right? So produce, even meat products, eggshells, like things that will essentially be decomposed by bacteria without any harm to the environment. That's essentially what we're talking about with biodegradable products, which then can also transfer to other things, which is important for us to be mindful in other areas of our shopping, which comes to health and beauty products as well. So that's dish soap, laundry soap, shampoo, conditioner, products that you're using on your bodies that then will be washed down to our water system. So we have most of the products that we would carry at Joanne's Place would fall into that criteria. That would be important for us to ensure that they are coming from biodegradable sources, natural, not chemical based. So again, what's going into our soil and our water supply will be not toxic and won't cause any additional harm to other living things.
It's like, I know a lot of people when they're going camping, they're looking for like soap and things that are going to be 100% biodegradable. That's so that, if they're bathing in the lakes and things like that, and same for even just swimming in the lake and you have cosmetics on your body, like the amount of chemicals that are in conventional products that aren't factoring in biodegradable ingredients have such a harm to our bodies of water, and then in turn from that also into an environment standpoint as well too.
Absolutely. It's us talking about sustainability, this is a whole kind of other aspect of that the products we're consuming in all areas of our life will not cause harm when put back into the environment. And I think sometimes we wouldn't think about that, right? We wouldn't think about what's on your skin when you go swimming, right? You wouldn't think about the shampoo you use necessarily when you jumped into the lake, but that definitely all plays a role when we're looking at this big picture of sustaining the planet
Mm-hmm.
and what that means for each of us.
Well, yeah, what's it going to do to the fish that are in the lake and that kind of thing, right?
Well, one of the big things right now with beauty care is the tiny little microbeads that are in a lot of face washes and things like that. And those are actually made completely of plastic, right? So that those don't break down. So if you think about how small those little micro balls are, and you've got, you know, millions of those bottles out there and people using them, that's just going directly into our water supply. And then what happens is that can't be filtered out. It's too small, and the fish eat it, and everyone else kind of mouths on it, and then it's just kind of that vicious circle, right? So yeah, it's really important to make sure that you're doing the best that you can in this sense of biodegradable.
Actually, a fun fact about camping is that even if you're choosing biodegradable dish soap, that is only truly biodegradable if you're using it, I believe it's like 30 feet from the water, and it needs to run through that soil in order to properly biodegrade. Like when it comes to shampoo and that kind of thing, I mean, of course these are better choices, but really the ideal if you are camping is, you know, choosing that biodegradable dish soap or shampoo or conditioner, whatever that is, but you're not washing your hair or your dishes right in the lake. You're grabbing that dishwater from the lake and you're bringing it 30 feet away, and it's rinsing through that soil.
Yeah, because I know provincial parks, you're not even allowed to dump your even biodegradable dish soap into, you have to put it down the gray, it has to go down the toilet,
right,
into the gray water where they dispose of it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's still essentially residues that can be left over that can still affect the lakes for sure.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think too, like Heather, what you're saying, you know, especially with health and beauty products, I think it can be overwhelming to stare at ingredients and look at it and think, I have no idea what these things are. Even natural products in their chemical names can be very difficult to interpret. But, you know, with Google and the resources we have today, you're able to look at what exactly products or ingredients are to see any petroleum-based products are still going to have a negative effect on the environment. And unfortunately, lots of conventional health and beauty products, stuff we're putting on our face, are still oil-based. They're still petroleum products, which will have a negative impact on the environment no matter what. So even little things like that, things we don't think about, can still leach into the system in negative ways.
Mm-hmm. A great tool to use that I've recommended a lot of times to people is go to the environmental working group online or using the app called Think Dirty, and that can give you more details in terms of the products they're using, from like your dish soap to your cosmetic products, shampoo, conditioner, makeup, your household cleaners, and they're going to give you the information on the ingredients that are in there, a rating as to like how good to bad this product is, and then also the impact that those ingredients are going to have full circle in terms of what it does for the environment, whether it's positive or negative as well too. So we've talked about our reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and a little bit about biodegradable. But as we mentioned in our previous podcast, we are really always trying to be at the forefront of all of those when we're choosing products that we have in Joanne's Place, and also the products that we are using to package the food and the products we're using in 76 Sips. So Heather and Rebecca here have done diligent details on making sure that these products, you know, fit this criteria. So do you guys want to expand a little bit about the packaging or the production in which 76 Sips is taking into consideration these principles?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that when we really started to look at what we wanted to do with SIPs is we wanted to see how we can stand out into the community. And one of the things that we noticed was that sustainability hasn't been necessarily huge in the forefront. There are a couple other businesses and organizations in Peterborough that do a fantastic job at putting that as one of their main priorities. However, we wanted to take that a little bit further and see what we could do in terms of trying to become completely sustainable. And one of the things that we learned very quickly is to become completely sustainable is absolutely impossible. So you have to set yourself with the standard of just trying your best and doing the best thing that you can in the moment, right? So even the things that we know now, or that the practices we're doing now, may not necessarily be the best things for us in 2 years from now, or even 6 months. So it's again being flexible and willing to learn and adapt and grow with that too. So for SIPS itself, we spent an extensive amount of time doing background research and checking on every single product that came into the cafe. So that went from everything from our packaging to the food that we're using, the brands that we're carrying, even down to the paper that we're using for our business cards and things like that. So it's trying to be as sustainable as possible. And we've done a pretty good job. I think there's been some trial and errors. Like one of the things that we had with our smoothie cups, we wanted them to be completely biodegradable right off the start. But right now we have recyclable ones, which actually makes it more sustainable for us to use through those, and instead of buying a new whole set of biodegradable. So we're slowly implementing even more procedures or more steps to further our sustainability. But yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a long process. Like I'm glad we are where we're at now, where it's kind of, we've done the research and the due diligence, because now we can look back and it's a lot easier to just say, this aligns with our ethics and standards and this doesn't. But yeah, it's a big project. What would you say, Rebecca, would be the most, time consuming part for you, or the most involved aspect of trying to be a sustainable cafe?
I think just really intentionally thinking about every step. It has been a really big learning curve for me, and I'm sure that it will continue to be, but it's actually a lot of fun as well. A lot of the things that I'm learning, I can translate to my home life as well. So, the kinds of things that I enjoy, for example, is we make our own milks for the smoothie. Right now we're using coconut milk, and as we talked about a little bit, maybe coconut isn't the most sustainable in terms of the fruit that we're choosing to use, but what we do is we take this shredded coconut and we turn it into our own coconut milk. So that is eliminating a huge amount of containers, those Tetra packs. Another thing that we do, and I think Heather mentioned, is make our own soup stock from our veggie scraps.
Yeah, so even just touching back on Rebecca said about the coconut milk. So one of the reasons why we agreed and settled on coconut milk for the time being was the fact that we can take the shredded coconut that we use after soaking the milk and turn it actually into macaroons. So we are actually getting two products out of one when doing things this way. So in the long term of it, being sustainable in that aspect has been really beneficial for us. So yeah, it's just, again, and then it's using everything that we possibly can. So again, same thing with our soup stock, right? Mm-hmm. So anything that we use for our salads or veggies, and that's not necessarily perfectly used, then we add it to our soup stocks. Or any of the produce that comes in that's not necessarily great, or it's a little bit imperfected that we wouldn't sell at the stores, the managers will send that over to us, and then we can turn that usually into soups or things like that can use those up so that it's not getting wasted or thrown in the landfill. So it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. A conversation that we actually just had earlier this week is, certain products that we're not completely going through, like, for example, carrot juice, if we have a little bit left when it's just before the date, putting that into ice cube trays so that we can use that down the road, and we're eliminating waste in that sense. So yeah, like I said, it's actually been really fun and really interesting to learn as we go. And as has been a theme throughout this podcast, right, we're not going to get it perfect right off the bat. For example, like the coconut milk, we did the best we could at that time, but now we're realizing that, maybe oat milk is better, and we're changing and we're evolving as we go. And I think that's such an important thing to remember throughout all of these discussions.
One of the things that's great about coming to Sips and Joanne's place, I know we've mentioned this in previous podcasts before, but it's somewhere you can trust, right? So it's, like we said, time is very valuable and very important. So if you can't do the research and do all the backlog, you can trust the fact that we've done it ourselves. So we have spent a significant amount of time researching our products that we carry. Our hemp seeds are harvested through Manitoba Hemp, which is here in Canada. We use Chocosil chocolate. Yeah, there's a lot of different products that we use that are practicing sustainable ethics and following those standards. And that's why we stand behind those brands. And constantly trying to do the best that we can. So any of our packaging that we use, any of our coffee cups, our straws, anything like that is biodegradable or recyclable to the best extent that we can, so that we make sure that we are not putting that onto our consumers, right? We don't want you to be stuck with a container that you can't do anything with, and then you get stressed out because you're not doing the best you can for the environment. So let us take that stress out for you, because we've already done the work. It's funny because even things like straws, right? So something as simple as a straw, the amount of conversations that we have had over straws and what's the best straw, is this plastic one or is paper, and paper is, was not the greatest for our smoothies. And then we finally settled on a corn straw, which is really fantastic and breaks down in hot water. But it's trial and error and figuring all those things out and getting to that point. And it's always a work in progress, but it's exciting, it's fun, and we're at a place that is very promising and moving forward. And even with our community impact initiative, what we do is anything that we have that's excess waste or any of our food that's coming to date, we donate it through an organization called Second Harvest and Food Rescue. So that means that our food isn't ending up in a landfill and someone else is getting a chance to benefit from it. So looking at sustainability from when the product comes into us, and then as far as we can send it out too.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's important to really highlight, like, we're doing that work. I think it's important for you to educate yourself on it as well too, but we're definitely doing that work in terms of the products we're creating here at SIPS, or even in our bulk packaging as well too, but also the products in which we decide to carry on our shelves as well. So just one thing to even note as consumers, because as you can gather from these series, is there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work that's been done, but there's a lot of work to still be done. And I think as consumers, we need to always be, intentional in moving forward, because although having your reusable straw, or reusing your mason jars, or bringing your reusable bags, those are all fantastic steps and they're great starting points. But we want to go above that, and we want you to go above that as well too, is really choosing the right products that are obviously suited for you, that's sustainable, certified organic, and all the other things we've talked about in our podcasts earlier. But it's really continuing to keep going, because things are always evolving, and we know that in this industry is there's always something new, something better that's on the forefront, and we're being mindful of that and consciously following along on those I don't want to say trends, but essentially what is trending in continuing to grow in that way. So at Joanne's Place, we're always looking at different brands, and Sarah's going to speak to maybe some companies that we have that are starting to make that next step beyond those basic levels of reducing, reusing, recycling, and packaging as well.
Yeah, I think thanks, Marissa. It's great to highlight, like you're saying, that we're always taking advances and step forwards when it comes to sustainability, and also then to recognize there's some companies have been doing this for all along, right? There's some that have realized this right out of the gate, and we say it's trending, but they've really been there all along. Like, we carry some excellent products and companies that have believed in these practices right from their founding, which is amazing and so inspiring to hear a lot of their stories. And I think that sometimes you as consumers don't always get to hear all that we do as employees of Joanne's Place, some of the brand stories. And so, I mean, for example, like Ahimsa, which is a brand that has a lot of reusable, sustainable products like straws and packaging and composters that can be in your home, that if you live in the city and you don't have that available, composters for your countertop, things made from rice husks, things like discarded fabrics that women are patterning and making into little pouches. Like, they take it a step further. They're every aspect of their company looks at how they can make a difference in all areas, like we said, people, planet, and then a profit. I know, Marissa, you did a series or a YouTube video on the Pluck Tea company, which is a brand new company to our store, where they also take it to the extra, like, they take extra steps. So it's inspiring to see lots of these young people who are starting these companies often, where they are reusing products from other industries into their products. They're right down to the packaging that they use is fully sustainable, and that is a mission for their entire company. Choco Sol was talked about as a chocolate company from Toronto. They're taking things to the next level, and there's lots of other companies that we could highlight. But it is really inspiring right now to work in this industry and see how much is changing and how much is evolving, and how people are really passionately caring about your health, but also the health of the environment. So really, we invite you in, come in, talk to any of us, talk to our wonderful staff about all of these steps and initiatives we talked about over these series, and we would love to talk to you about them, help you through wherever you are in your journey. Like we said, you could have been living this lifestyle for 25 years, and we know there's still more, or you're taking that very first step today. So we're there to help you in any way.
Absolutely. The start is to have the desire to want to make the change, and you have an immense amount of support through the Joanne's Place staff, which way you decide to reach out, whether it's email, through our website, you're coming in to talk to us. If we don't have the answer, we're going to find it for you, and if we don't have the answer, it's something that we want to make sure we have more information on. So yeah, please come in, let us know what your thoughts are. We also want to know what you guys are doing in a sustainability aspect, how you are incorporating the reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and using biodegradable products in your routine. And also, if you have other ideas for us to put into initiative and how we can better support our community, we always want to know those answers as well too.
All right, guys, that concludes part 3 of our sustainability series. Just in case you missed part 1 and 2, be sure to go back and take a listen. We talked about the difference between certified organic food versus conventional food, and also talked about how you can go above and beyond and choose a more sustainable lifestyle. Big shout out to my team, Sarah, Rebecca, and Heather. Thank you so much for joining me on this series. You were such a wealth of information, and I'm sure our listeners loved every second of it. And to our listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in, following our channel, and supporting our business over the last year. You know what to do here. Make sure you have subscribed to our channel so you do not miss a notification when a new episode is released, and be sure to share on social media that you're listening to the Wellness on Purpose podcast.